This webinar will review the best practices in early childhood education pre-kindergarten guide. This webinar will be one of two and will specifically highlight the pre-kindergarten guide web pages that are available on our ECE division website. Our agenda for this webinar is to review current supports and timelines, review background information of this work, review the usability and functionality of the pre-kindergarten guide web pages, review connections to the pre-kindergarten guidelines, and discuss next steps for implementation. Our learning objectives for today's webinar is to review current supports and timelines that align to implementation of the 2022 Texas pre-kindergarten guidelines in the 2023-24 school year. Understand the functionality and usability of the best practices and ECE guide for pre-kindergarten educators supporting ECE classrooms. Review connections between the 2022 Texas pre-kindergarten guidelines and the best practices in ECE pre-K guides. Developmentally appropriate practices, research-based best practices, supporting emergent bilingual students, and special populations in order to support high-quality ECE programs in the state. Explore next steps for technical support with the pre-kindergarten guidelines through the best practices in ECE guides with upcoming webinars and office hours. First, we will review our current supports and timelines for the pre-kindergarten guideline work and the best practices in early childhood education pre-kindergarten guide. We currently have all pre-kindergarten guideline documents published on our webpage. These include webinar recordings as well as office hour dates that will be scheduled monthly throughout the 2023-2024 school year. In addition, we have our birth through second grade vertical alignment documents available on our Educator Resources webpage. This webinar will highlight our current work on the best practices in early childhood education, pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and administrator guide web pages to support instruction in early childhood programs. Webinars and office hours to support these web pages will continue to be held throughout fall 2023. Our upcoming project includes the pre-K guides that are similar to the TEKS guide on the Texas Gateway platform. This work will be rolled out between now and throughout 2024. Office hours for all of this work will be combined to support the pre-kindergarten guidelines and best practices guides beginning in September 2023. The best practices in ECE guide training rollout. Webinar 1 of 2 will focus on reviewing developmentally appropriate practices, research-based best practices, supporting children with disabilities, and supporting emergent bilingual children. Webinar 2 will focus on learning environments, including classroom organization, physical arrangement, learning centers, outdoor learning environments, activity lesson planning, and daily schedules. Let's review the background information for the best practices in ECE guide web pages. Parts of the introduction section of the 2015 Texas pre-kindergarten guidelines were taken out in order to provide a condensed format of the 2022 guidelines with a focus on skills and outcomes. The decision was made to compile that content as a separate resource. As focus groups were conducted with the pre-kindergarten guidelines, we found that there was a need from the field to provide more support with best practices, not only in pre-kindergarten, but also in kindergarten, as well as guidance for administrators who support early childhood educators. In addition, the decision was made to provide current research in the early childhood field, as well as provide a condensed, user-friendly, and easily accessible format available for educators through web pages. Lastly, we heard a substantial request for exemplars in the field in order to provide more practical application of these best practices. You will see these represented in real classroom photos throughout the web pages. As we look at the best practices pre-kindergarten guide, we see that our purpose is to support educators in providing effective, high-quality instructional practices in early childhood classrooms. The audience for this pre-kindergarten guide are teachers, teachers' assistants, district coaches, site coaches, and any other instructional staff that support our pre-kindergarten classrooms. Let's review the pre-kindergarten guides through the lens of usability and functionality of the web pages. We want to share our shift in usability from our previous intent of providing content in a guidebook to providing content through web pages. Our initial thought was to have the content in one comprehensive place. Shifting to web pages allows us to add or update content as needed, such as adding and linking to exemplars from across the state. Web pages also allow us the ability to print specific pages as needed, such as printing the developmentally appropriate practices page for a training. It also allows us the capability of linking within this source or to another resource. The functionality of the Best Practices Guide includes a landing page that provides the Pre-Kindergarten Best Practices Guide, the Kindergarten Best Practices Guide, and the Administrator Support Guide. As you click on one of the landing pages, as you see here, it will take you to the specific guide of your choice. As you see in the visual example, the Pre-Kindergarten Guide landing page provides basic information of the purpose of the page, and more importantly, a list of the resources where you will see individual subpages based on content. As we develop in the field and think about supports for educators, our hope is to add more resources as necessary. We also hope to date stamp these pages in the event we make any updates. Here is a direct look at the resources and content pages. As you click on each link, it will take you to its own individual subpage. For the purposes of today's webinar, we will focus on the first 4 pages: developmentally appropriate practices in early childhood education, research-based best practices for school readiness, supporting children receiving special education services in the early childhood setting, and supporting emergent bilingual children in the early childhood classroom. Let's look at the content in the foundational pages of the Best Practice Guide through the lens of making connections with the pre-kindergarten guidelines. The purpose of these Best Practice Guides is to ensure alignment across instructional practices by building a bridge between alignment to the pre-kindergarten guidelines through creating a learning environment that supports developmentally appropriate practices, supports learning through research-based strategies, and provides support to all learners, including our emergent bilingual and special population children. Let's begin with developmentally appropriate practices and strategies. This is known as a well-rounded concept of creating an environment for young children to thrive through play-based, child-led experiences that pique children's interest through hands-on, strengths-based learning. These practices in the pre-kindergarten classroom also include use of a high-quality curriculum aligned to the pre-kindergarten guidelines that help build developmentally appropriate skills. This is supported through continuous progress monitoring that occurs through formative and summative means that develop learning and help guide instruction. These developmentally appropriate practices and strategies include the importance of partnering with stakeholders that have an impact on our children's development, such as the family unit, staff members in and outside the classroom, and community members that collaborate with the pre-kindergarten classroom community. What do developmentally appropriate practices look like in action as supported by the pre-kindergarten guidelines? First, we want to use the TPG domains and outcomes to determine play-based opportunities in the environment. This could look like using music and movement to learn phonological awareness concepts, developing number sense activities through free choice of manipulatives and small group, or facilitating the environment for collaborative peer relationships while learning in centers, such as creating a dinosaur in the dramatic play area. This aligns directly with the use of high-quality pre-kindergarten adopted instructional materials or curriculums that support these play-based experiences and provides teachers with opportunities to engage students in all areas through a variety of means. Think of using all the senses. So for example, referencing TPG outcomes and child behaviors, while activity or lesson planning creates opportunities for culturally, linguistically, and ability-based experiences, such as building language and literacy through read-alouds, using a variety of tactile materials for artistic expression, or supporting opportunities through outdoor nature-based learning. High-quality PK3 and PK4 pre-kindergarten classrooms continuously reference formative and summative assessments to adjust instructional practices that meet every child's ability-based needs. High-quality pre-kindergarten classrooms in Texas utilize middle-of-the-year interim assessments, play-based observations, and/or adopted instructional material assessment tools to monitor progress in the classroom as part of best practices. Building partnerships with key stakeholders to build a network of support for the high-quality pre-kindergarten classroom begins with high-quality programs utilizing research-based early childhood classroom assessment tools and providing coaching to all classroom staff, including utilizing collaboration with families during the assessment process to determine developmental goals as aligned to the Texas Pre-Kindergarten Guidelines. This also includes collaborating with the community to provide developmentally appropriate experiences, such as taking a walking field trip to the local farmers market. Research-based best practices in pre-kindergarten include the foundation of the power of play, ensuring that children are learning within their zone of proximal development, best practices that ensures all children receive differentiated instruction as needed, and has educators use the strategy of gradual release within the classroom to promote child-led independent experiences. Let's look at these areas in a little bit more depth. There is a wealth of research regarding best practices in early childhood. What we have included in our research-based guide is not exhaustive of how children learn best, but it sets a foundation for creating high-quality pre-kindergarten classrooms for young children. What the research tells us is that children learn best through consistent strengths-based, play-based learning experiences that maintain a balance between teacher-led modeling and child-led learning that is engaging and developmentally appropriate. When we use the power of play with skills demonstrated through the pre-K guidelines, we build content knowledge, language skills, and social awareness in our youngest learners. The power of play benefits the whole child through various means. Engaging in various types of play schema brings joy and motivation to the child, especially when it is a freely chosen process and includes a hands-on, engaging model of learning. Using the power of play within the child's zone of proximal development allows the child to maximize independent development through play schema, such as the picture of a child using a block as a phone, aka make-believe. This leads us to ensuring that children receive differentiated instruction through scaffolding, which goes back to that zone of proximal development, where we reduce the amount of support as children gain independence of skills. The important thing to note is we do this through means of play, which a clear example we see in the classroom is children playing in learning centers. Finally, we address the model of gradual release, which ties into the other research-based practices, which speaks to modeling for children, working with children on those skills, and allowing children to practice those skills independently. Think of how we model reading through a read aloud, engaging together in phonological awareness activities through that read aloud, using rhyming games, alliteration chats, etc. These research-based best practices all make up for a successful, supportive, high-quality pre-kindergarten classroom. Children identified as emergent bilingual students in a pre-kindergarten classroom must have access to instruction with linguistic accommodations based on their English proficiency level. These accommodations occur in the way of providing constant oral language opportunities, enriching accommodations through the classroom environment, providing literacy-based activities to build phonological awareness across languages, and creating a foundation of consistent and supportive home-to-school connections to support emergent bilingual students in pre-kindergarten classrooms. Let's take a look at each area as it connects to the pre-kindergarten guidelines and best practices in the learning environment. Oral language in the supportive emergent bilingual classroom looks like providing multiple daily opportunities to expand and extend language input and output, such as the question of the day. It also includes using knowledge of the stages of language development and planning instruction with a focus on oral language and vocabulary development, such as using read-alouds. It also includes modeling language rather than making corrections, such as a student saying, "I go to the park," and the teacher saying, "Oh, you went to the park?" This also looks like intentionally planning learning experiences that include partner work to encourage children's efforts at communicating, such as pair share or turn-in talk strategies. And last, oral language in the supportive emergent bilingual classroom looks like providing emphasis on specific language features. This may be targeted sounds such as alliteration, word analysis such as rhyming, vocabulary in specific languages, and comprehension with visual context. A supportive emergent bilingual classroom environment looks like differentiated instruction. This can be based on language, culture, and learning needs, such as visual cues. A supportive emergent bilingual classroom environment also looks like incidental learning, which includes natural, meaningful, motivating, interesting, and interactive activities. It also includes social interaction and communication that is facilitated in the environment and encourages communication and social interaction among all members of the classroom. Something that we do want to note is that these are not just best practices for emergent bilingual students, but they are best practices for all young learners. A supportive literacy-based emergent bilingual classroom looks like providing books and environmental print in the home language and English, and that are culturally and linguistically sustaining. This also looks like providing instruction in an explicit manner with modeling of simple language and use of appropriate scaffolding during literacy-based activities. A supportive home-to-school connection in the emergent bilingual classroom looks like encouraging families to continue development of the home language while acquiring English. This includes providing support as necessary, such as providing bilingual books for the home and for the school. This also may look like providing support for families who do not have experience with United States schools and that may require extra support. This may look like creating class newsletters in both languages, providing visual support, etc. Supporting our students in special education in pre-kindergarten classrooms requires an inclusive setting where children's needs are met through supportive learning environments that facilitate active participation and opportunities for communication and social interaction with all members of the classroom. In action, this looks like planning and engaging the whole child through accessibility and accommodations in the physical arrangement and organization of the classroom, including lessons and activities that are modified per student needs. This also looks like facilitating relationship building with peers through opportunities for communication and social interactions. Key points in this section of the guide include that the effective teacher's role is to intentionally plan learning environments and experiences that ensure active participation for all students, and that the effective teacher helps typically developing peers build supportive relationships with their classmates receiving special education services, and that the effective teacher facilitates opportunities for communication and social interaction among all members of the classroom. For more information, please check out the inclusioninTexas.org website. You have now seen the content included in our foundation pages of the Best Practices in ECE Pre-Kindergarten Guide. As you process the content you heard, think about how these foundation Best Practices Pre-K guides will support your current role in the pre-kindergarten classroom. In addition, think about some next steps that you will take with the pre-kindergarten guidelines and the best practices guide in your classroom. If you have any questions related to the pre-kindergarten guidelines or the best practices in early childhood education guides, please contact our ECE support portal through the QR code. As we come to the end of this webinar, we would like to ask for your participation in completing our survey through the QR code in order to serve and support you better with implementation of the pre-kindergarten guidelines and the best practices in early childhood education guides. We thank you for your service and commitment to providing high-quality instruction to some of our youngest learners in Texas.